as the anthem reminds us, the true North is indeed strong and free.
King Charles III of Great Britain opening the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa. As Associated Press describes it, a speech widely viewed as a show of support in the face of annexation threats by U.S. President Donald Trump. Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, May 27th, 2025. Some other headlines today on Wall Street. Stocks climb after President Trump says he will delay 50% tariffs on the European Union. Special Presidential Envoy to Ukraine Keith Kellogg talks about the president's frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin over the war in Ukraine. State Department asked about reported food aid riots in Gaza at a distribution center run by a new organization supported by Israel and the U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, announces he'll be running for governor instead of re-election as senator. Congressman Glenn Ivey, Democrat of Maryland, returns from El Salvador, where he was not able to visit in prison. Deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser talks about how the district will cut spending by hundreds of millions of dollars this year to meet a congressional mandate. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, speaks at the funeral of the late Congressman Gerald Connelly, also Democrat of Virginia. And we remember former Congressman Charles Rangel, Democrat of New York, who has passed away at the age of 94. That and more coming up on Washington Today. CBS News writes that King Charles III spoke of a critical moment for Canada Tuesday as he addressed the Canadian Parliament in a rare gesture that comes as Canada grapples with tariffs and annexation threats by President Trump. The British monarch, who formerly serves as Canada's head of state, arrived in the capital of Ottawa on Monday, part of a two-day visit that's widely viewed as a form of pushback against Mr. Trump's calls to make Canada the 51st state. The king delivered a speech from the throne, which marked the start of a new session of Parliament after the centre-left Liberal Party won last month's federal election. The speech, written by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's office, not the king, outlined the new government's agenda and priorities while acknowledging the political and economic dynamics on the world stage affecting the country. That was from CBS News. Here's King Charles III.
Many Canadians are feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. Fundamental change is always unsettling. Yet this moment is also an incredible opportunity, an opportunity for renewal, an opportunity to think big and to act bigger, an opportunity for Canada to embark on the largest transformation of its economy since the Second World War. A confident Canada, which has welcomed new Canadians, including from some of the most tragic global conflict zones, can seize this opportunity by recognizing that all Canadians can give themselves far more than any foreign power on any continent can ever take away, and that by staying true to Canadian values, Canada can build new alliances and a new economy that serves all Canadians. The Prime Minister and the President of the United States, for example, have begun defining a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the United States, rooted in mutual respect and founded on common interests to deliver transformational benefits for both sovereign nations. Simultanément,
in parallel, the government is working to strengthen its relationships with reliable trading partners and allies around the world, recognizing that Canada has what the world needs and the values the world respects. Canada is ready to build a coalition of like-minded countries that share its values, that believe in international cooperation and the free and open exchange of goods, services, and ideas. In this new, fast-evolving world, Canada is ready to lead. This will be demonstrated in June, when Canada convenes the G7 summit.
King Charles III opening the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa, speaking both in English, and you heard the interpretation as he spoke in French. The King also said that there will be more spending on border security and defense, and Canada will enhance its ties to Europe.
To be truly strong, Canada must be secure. To that end, the government will introduce legislation to enhance security at Canada's borders. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies will have new tools to stop the flow of fentanyl and its precursors. The Canada Border Services Agency will be given new powers to examine goods destined for export, to prevent the transport of illegal and stolen products, including cars. Le gouvernement protégera.
The government will protect Canada's sovereignty by rebuilding, rearming, and reinvesting in the Canadian Armed Forces. It will boost Canada's defense industry by joining Rearm Europe to invest in transatlantic security with Canada's European partners. And it will invest to strengthen its presence in the north, as this region, which is an integral part of Canada, faces new threats.
King Charles III, again, speaking both English, and then you heard the interpretation from his French at the state opening of the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa today. The U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, was interviewed by CBC Radio in Canada last week, and the interview aired this past Saturday about the King's visit and U.S.-Canadian relations.
The King is coming to Ottawa next week. He is going to read the speech from the throne, something a monarch hasn't done in Canada since 1977. Do you believe that there is a message for your president in the fact that the King is coming and giving this address?
I'm excited for Canada that the King is coming. I've sat through a few of the speeches from the throne when I was the ambassador to the Netherlands. We will be watching the speech very closely for the content of the speech because it is the platform of the ruling party. Okay, so we will be looking at the content. We're thrilled that the King will be here. If there's a message in there, there's easier ways to send messages. Just give me a call. Carney can call the president at any time, send the message. But I know what the implication is. It's about the 51st state. It's over. And, move on. If the Canadians want to keep talking about it, that's their business. I'm not talking about it. Donald Trump is not talking about it. We've got too much on our plate to move forward because we're all about increasing America's prosperity, safety, and security.
U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra on CBC Radio on Saturday ahead of King Charles opening Canada's Parliament today in Ottawa. More from the CBS News article on the speech. Marking the start of Parliament with a speech is a long-standing tradition in Canada and other former parts of the British Empire, but it's highly unusual for the King to deliver the speech himself. Instead, the King's representative in Canada, the Governor-General, normally speaks on his behalf. The last time the monarch personally gave the speech was 1977, when Charles's mother, Queen Elizabeth II, traveled to Canada's capital for the event. That was from CBS News. This is Washington Today. Politico Europe reports that British officials are working to negotiate down Donald Trump's 10% tariffs on British exports. Peter Mandelson, the UK's ambassador to Washington, said Tuesday. Earlier this month, Prime Minister Keir Starmer became the first world leader to reach a deal with Trump to lower the White House's 25% tariffs on car, steel, and aluminum imports into the U.S., yet the deal failed to lower the 10% baseline tariffs Trump announced in April. Again, the article from Politico Europe. Ambassador Mandelson was interviewed at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C.
The New York Times praised the back-to-back deals with the European Union and the U.S., but it also, in the following paragraph, raised some questions about your leverage. Quote, the limited scope and occasionally stingy terms of these deals, both of which require painful concessions, attests to Britain's diminished position in a post-Brexit era. Far from being an agile free agent that's able to strike opportunistic deals, as Brexiteers once predicted, Britain finds itself squeezed between dueling heavyweights. I wonder if you could comment on that, and most particularly, I was in Brussels last week, and the negotiators on the EU side are not any too happy about this 10% baseline tariff, particularly from the UK, which has a trade surplus with the United States.
Not the first time, by the way. I was reading a great book over the weekend, which I'm only a third of my way into, Ed Luce's book about Brzezinski. And it reminded me that Nixon had done exactly the same in the early 70s. Another 10% baseline tariff put on trade between the United States and its partners. So this is not exactly unique. It's not new. I'm not saying it's welcome. I'm saying I'm welcome. But it's not new.
Is that the final, or do you want to improve those terms and perhaps?
Well, let's see. Let's see. I think the president seems quite wedded to that 10% baseline, just as President Nixon was wedded to his 10% baseline. And I'm not sure there have been other presidents who have become equally wedded to baselines of their own. But within that baseline, I think we can and should look where it is on our mutual advantage to reduce not just the effective tariffs that are operating, but also the non-tariff barriers. And I think this is a source of great irritation to the president. We in Europe are only too ready sometimes to say, oh yes, we're free trade, we're open economies, let's bring down tariffs. And then we sort of get in the old non-tariff barriers here, which frustrate trade. I can understand his frustration. I'm a former trade commissioner, as you said, in Europe, and I was my constant pursuit was with trade liberalisation. Now, for all the reasons I said, I know that era has moved on, but nonetheless, where it is to our mutual advantage, we should reduce barriers, not grow them, when it comes to trade.
British Ambassador to the United States Peter Mandelson, interviewed by Frederick Kemp, Atlantic Council President and CEO at the Council in Washington, D.C. Story from Reuters: Wall Street stocks climbed on Tuesday after U.S. President Donald Trump stepped back from his threat to impose 50% tariffs on the European Union, easing trade tensions and boosting sentiment as markets reopened after the Memorial Day break. On Sunday, Trump restored a July 9th tariff deadline to allow for talks between Washington and the 27-nation European bloc. That article from Reuters. Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, was interviewed today on CNBC about why President Trump made the tariff threat on the EU in the first place.
I've been involved in those negotiations when they're in D.C. with Secretary Lutnick and Jamieson Greer, and I got to say that there's not a lot of movement. There was not a lot of movement coming into the week. And as your pet economist, Joe, one of the theories I had of what was going on is that, like, the UK deal was actually pretty easy to negotiate because the UK had some specific stuff they really cared a lot about, like autos. We had some stuff we really cared a lot about, like they hadn't allowed our farmers to ship stuff to their country. And so the deal was kind of easy to make. Well, you get your thing, we get our thing, and so on. But in Europe, they got all these countries, and each country has a different objective, and they have to aggregate these objectives at the EU. And so while we've been not making the progress we wanted to see, you can sort of understand that they've got a problem where they can't make up their own minds. And so I think having a little bit of a deep breath and waiting for them to figure out what they want, then that should help the negotiations. But the bottom line is, across all the countries, I expect we'll probably see a few more deals even this week. There's some stuff very close to finished, and it's up to the president, of course. But in the end, the other thing I would say is that you should expect the best out of these deals. President Trump wants to put America first. He understands that our trading partners want to put themselves first, and he wants them to be second in our affections and America first. And the things are moving forward very quickly. And I think EU is actually about the toughest nut to crack amongst our allies because of the sort of aggregation of preferences problem.
Is it all about tariffs? Is it about non-trade protectionist policies?
Yeah.
And I guess, but you got, how many countries did you say, sir? could be a little of each from,
Yeah.
it sounds like obviously it's not monolithic, and I don't see how you figure it out by July 9th, Kevin.
Well, the non-tariff barrier issue, for example, there are simple things that we've been trying to do and have been succeeding to do with other countries where we just sort of say, hey, if a car is okay for us to run on our roads and your cars are okay for you to run on your roads, then why don't we acknowledge that your regulations are okay for cars and our regulations are okay for cars? You can acknowledge that, and then we could just move our cars around without lots of costly retooling. And that's the kind of thing that we're shooting for. And then there's a lot of countries that are like, okay, sure. But then with Europe, it's not quite so easy.
Kevin Hassett directs the National Economic Council at the White House. Interview today on CNBC. President Trump said on Sunday he had spoken by phone with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and that, quote, the Commission President said that talks will begin rapidly, and that was the reason for delaying the 50% tariffs on imports from the EU until July 9th. Paula Pinho, EC chief spokesperson, spoke on Monday at a news conference in Brussels about that phone call.
It was a good call. Indeed, as was also noted in the social media post by President von der Leyen and confirmed by President Trump himself when he spoke to the press yesterday. So basically, they agreed both to fast-track the trade negotiations and to stay in close contact. Now, in terms of what were the details of the discussions, we will not enter into that. But what I can say, we are talking about, of course, the world's single largest and closest trading relation. So these negotiations are complex. And so they are taking time. Now, with this call, there's now also a new impetus for the negotiations, and we will take it from there. It's positive to see that there's engagement also at the level of the presidents. And from our side, we always said that we were ready to make a deal. Now, in terms of negotiations, as you know, we have a very good negotiating team in place, led by Commissioner Šefčovič, who is bringing forward the discussions. This was now the moment for a contact at President's level. And in the meantime, the discussions will continue as early as already this afternoon, where Commissioner Šefčovič will have a call with Secretary for Trade Lutnick.
Paula Pinho is the European Commissioner Chief Spokesperson, a news conference in Brussels on Monday. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 740, NASDAQ up 461, S&P up 118. Straight from the New York Post, President Trump warned Tuesday that Russian President Vladimir Putin is playing with fire days after he called the dictator absolutely crazy over repeated aerial attacks against Ukraine. Trump wrote on Truth Social, what Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia, and I mean really bad. He's playing with fire. That was from the New York Post article. Keith Kellogg, President Trump's special presidential envoy for Ukraine, was on Fox News Channel today about why the president is frustrated with Russian President Putin.
Look, he's doing a lot. I mean, and his frustration is understandable, because what's happened when you attack cities like that and indiscriminately kill women and children through missile attacks or drone attacks, that's a clear violation of the 1977 Geneva Protocol, which is designed to prevent that. Of course, the Geneva Convention that's the rules on warfare, and that was added onto it. And the Russians have signed up to that. The United States has signed up to it, and the Ukrainians have signed up to it as well. And that is to prevent that indiscriminate killing that you've seen over the weekend, women and children. You know, let's give full credit to President Trump. You know, he's done more in 120 days than the previous administration did in 1,200 days. And we've had meetings on trying to bring peace to the region in Jeddah, in Riyadh, in Paris, and in London, and then recently in Istanbul, to try to bring the parties together for them to come up with a plan to go forward and to bring peace. And we've got the Ukrainians in a position where we believe that this is what they want. And we have a 22-point plan that we brought back out of London that kind of outlines where we want to go. And frankly, we think it's a good plan because neither side really likes it. Well, I think you make progress when both sides don't like it, and it's gone well, Charlie. So we're pretty confident there. And I think when you ask what he needs to do, I think he just needs to keep at it. It's frustrating, I know that. But the only guy that can do this is President Trump. I really believe that. I've said that repeatedly on air.
Right.
But based on his personality and who he is, he's the one who can bring peace to the region. It's not going to be easy. You know, negotiations are never easy, but there's nowhere this war is going to end through violence, through killing of soldiers on either side.
Right.
It's going to come down to negotiation. That's where you have to be.
Keith Kellogg, Special Presidential Envoy for Ukraine, on Fox News Today. TheHill.com writes that Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, warned Russian President Vladimir Putin that there's a new sheriff in town and that the Senate is prepared to act regardless of the next steps the Russian leader chooses to take. In a pair of posts on the social media platform X and in a Wall Street Journal op-ed Tuesday, Graham said Putin's dramatic escalation in military strikes over the weekend and his 2-hour phone call with President Trump last week reflect the, quote, same old from Putin's Russia. That was from The Hill. From NBC News, President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have agreed to an exchange of prisoners, Russia's foreign minister said Tuesday. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in Turkey, President Trump is a man who wants results. The article says he claimed that Trump's efforts were being sabotaged by some European countries as he referred to ongoing efforts to reach a ceasefire in Ukraine. You're listening to Washington Today. Times of Israel writes that thousands of Palestinians on Tuesday overran one of the newly established aid distribution sites in southern Gaza's Rafah, only hours after the military announced the new aid mechanism backed by Israel and the United States began operating for the first time. Footage posted to social media showed crowds surging into the area and taking boxes of food. The IDF, which secures the area around the facility, confirmed that troops fired warning shots outside the compound but denied reports claiming it opened fire from a helicopter or towards the center itself. That was from the Times of Israel. This new group is called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF. In Washington, the State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce got questions about it.
Cindy McCain said that Hamas is not breaking up the food deliveries, that people are starving and there are food riots because people are desperate. And the criticism of the GHF has been that it is not independent or impartial, that it was started by the Netanyahu government with people who are supposedly independent, and that it is only operating in the South, deliberately designed with 4 distribution points in the South in order to have people in the North move south for the aid and therefore accelerate the movement of people and the putting people in the South rather than in the North where they wanted to be. So there are a lot of controversies about this from the ground, yes, from all of our reporting. McCain said that no one had approached the World Food Program, which is still delivering food into Gaza, that people have been desperate. No one had, she had met with, as you know, the secretary. She said she welcomed that, was grateful for it, that the Rubio and McCain families have been friends for decades, but that they had a frank conversation about what's happening between Israel and the food deliveries, and that no one had even told them about this foundation or given them.
Well, Andrea, this is where again there's certainly, and this is something the world is watching, something we've all cared about getting resolved. It is not an uncomplicated situation. This is, however, the first delivery of major aid, if not the only aid we've been hearing for months. I wish that Cindy McCain had spoken up, that they had found a way to move food into Gaza, because that certainly hadn't been conveyed to us. But now, which if that's the case, that's great. What I do know is that the people on the ground now, as the number I told you, I think is rather significant, 462,000 meals. You know, that's what we're focused on. And that this is, and I'm not going to address either gossip or complaints or people who knew or weren't included or would do it a different way or who's shooting at whom. That Hamas, it's not Hamas. The real story here, the story is that aid and food is moving into Gaza at a massive scale at this point when you're looking at 8,000 food boxes. Was this going to be like going to the mall or through a drive-through? No, it wasn't. This is a complicated environment, and the story is the fact that it's working. I find it difficult that there are people who would go on television shows to complain about a process that is working and moving food into the area.
Tammy,
will it improve over time? Would anything that we do improve over time? Yes, in all likelihood. And I think anyone would welcome someone like Mrs. McCain or anyone else who has a method within which to contribute to this effort, to be able to do so instead of going on television and complaining.
And that's
the real story is that this is succeeding, and I think we should all at least have the courage to embrace that.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce, questioned by NBC News reporter Andrea Mitchell at a news conference today at the State Department in Washington, D.C., referring to Cindy McCain. She is director of the United Nations World Food Program. U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was in Jerusalem Monday for memorial to the 2 Israeli embassy staff members shot and killed in Washington, D.C. last week by a suspect who shouted "Free Palestine." The Secretary was joined at a press conference by the Israeli Foreign Minister and also U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee.
We're so very honored that the Secretary is here. To our knowledge, it is the first time that a cabinet secretary has been here on Yom Yerushalayim, a very significant day here in Jerusalem. And we're grateful for her presence and the fact that the President has asked her to come, not only to be here to represent him and the United States, but also to offer personal condolences to the families of Yaron and Sarah. Their lives were taken from them last week. Their lives should have been celebrated this week as they were going to become engaged here in Israel and plan for a life together. Instead, because of an act of hateful terrorism, their lives were taken from them. But their memories will not be taken from any of us, and we should always be mindful that there are people who pay an incredible price to simply be Israelis and Jews. And it's why the United States must always stand. And it's why it's so very important that we welcome the Secretary here to the State of Israel as she comes to offer in person an extraordinary sense, not just of condolences, but also a sense of confidence that the relationship between our nations will never waver, nor will it ever falter. And so, Madam Secretary, thank you. Thank you for being here in person, for identifying the United States. Back home, this is Memorial Day, which means we honor those who died giving their lives for the service of the United States and giving us our freedom. We come on this day to recognize that every day someone in the service of Israel falls in the battle to keep your nation free. We will not forget that.
U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee on Monday in Jerusalem with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and the Israeli Foreign Minister. Story from Axios. President Trump cautioned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a phone call last week not to take any action that could jeopardize negotiations between the U.S. and Iran on a new nuclear deal. A White House official and a source familiar with the details tell Axios. Trump and other senior U.S. officials have grown concerned in recent weeks that Israel might bomb Iran's nuclear facilities or take other steps that could undermine the talks, the official said. Reporting from Axios. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, announced today that he will run for governor of Alabama and not for re-election as senator in 2026. No other Republican candidates so far have announced for next year's primary in the governor's race. It will be an open seat as the current governor, Republican Kay Ivey, is term limited and can't run again. Senator Tuberville made the announcement this afternoon on Fox News.
We're in Byron's Barbecue here in Auburn, Alabama today. I started my Senate run almost 7 years ago, right in this same building. You can see my friends and family. My 3-month-old new granddaughter, Rosie Grace, is here cheering us on. But it's great to be here. My wife and I, Suzanne, moved here over 25 years ago. As you know, I coached, and it was a great time. We made some great friends. It's been a lot of fun. My 2 boys, Tucker and Troy, were educated here. It's home. We've made a lot of friends and a lot of family. So a few years ago, I decided to give back to this great country and fight. President Trump was a guy that really was behind me in doing the Senate race. He's been behind me ever since. And today, I will announce that I will be the future governor of the great state of Alabama. There we go. Now, I've still got 18 months to go with President Trump to make America great again. We got a lot of work to do. Monday we'll go back and pass the big, beautiful bill for President Trump. But I'm doing this to help this country and the great state of Alabama. I'm a football coach. I'm a leader. I'm a builder. I'm a recruiter. And we're going to grow Alabama. We're going to bring manufacturing to the state. We're going to stop this illegal immigration. We're going to make education better again. And we're going to do everything possible to make sure our kids, when they've graduated in this great state, the Yellowhammer State, that they stay in this state and work. We're going to have workforce development. So, Will, we got a lot of work to do nationally. I'm looking forward to that with President Trump. He's got us on the right track. But meantime, I'll be running every weekend, doing the things I need to do to make sure that I can get over the threshold and win this governor's race, come back to Alabama, and work with President Trump and not stop, because he's fully supportive of this, to keep making America great again and put Alabama first.
Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican of Alabama, today on Fox News. He is 70 years old. Before he was elected to the Senate in 2020. Back from 1999-2008, he was the football coach at Auburn University. And the last Democrat to win statewide in Alabama was Doug Jones, who won a special election for the U.S. Senate in 2017. And Senator Tuberville now announcing he's not going to run for re-election in 2026. There's one other Republican who has done that so far, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, who's retiring. Also, Dick Durbin of Illinois, a Democrat, Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, Democrat, and Tina Smith of Minnesota, a Democrat, Gary Peters of Michigan, a Democrat, also retiring, and Michael Bennet of Colorado, a Democrat, is running for governor in his state. WTOP Radio in Washington reports that Maryland Congressman Glenn Ivey, a Democrat, returned to Dulles International Airport on Tuesday, frustrated that he had been unable to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia in an El Salvador prison. Abrego Garcia, Salvadoran living in Maryland, had been detained in El Salvador since March after being wrongly deported by the Trump administration. A federal judge of Maryland has ruled the administration must facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. Ivey said the Salvadoran government was notified in advance of Ivey's visit, accompanied by Abrego Garcia's attorney. But when they arrived at Santa Ana prison, they were told they needed to get a permit in San Salvador, more than an hour away. That was from WTOP Radio. Here is Congressman Ivey at the airport.
We are live now on Fox 5, and I know that you're here, the rest of the media here as well. So tell us some frustration for your trip.
Oh, absolutely. I was very, not just disappointed, but angry, actually. I mean, we'd contacted the embassy to El Salvador. In fact, I met with them last week for about an hour. So they certainly knew that we were coming and why. And then our embassy in El Salvador had contacted the government as well to try and set this up, as well as potential meetings with members of the government. So they knew we were coming, and they knew why we were coming. And then when we actually got to the jail, they said something about going to get a permit, going all the way. Santa Ana is a long ways, from about an hour and a half drive from San Salvador. They said, go back to San Salvador and get a permit. And I won't tell you what I said, but I mean, it's, ridiculous that an international delegation would get that kind of treatment, especially when we're making this kind of a request.
Yeah, so it's been, 5 weeks now since Senator Van Hollen was there. Any status update on Abrego Garcia? Do we know if he's still in the jail where you went to? Do we know if he's still alive and well?
Nothing's been confirmed along those lines. We believe he is, and we believe he's at Santa Ana, but they didn't even confirm that yesterday. So it was, kind of a runaround. It's a, stonewall effort, I guess, on the part of the government of El Salvador. But at the end of the day, he's part of what the courts are ordering to have happen, which is he needs to be brought back so he can have his day in court. There's 250 Venezuelans who've been jailed down there as well, who were deported from the United States. Apparently, there are reports that about 50 of them have no criminal records. They were in the United States legally, but they were deported to a country where they have no criminal offenses pending, or in Venezuela. So in the United States, Venezuela, and El Salvador, they don't have any criminal offenses pending at all. Yet they're being held in a jail for an indefinite period of time. That's un-American. That's not what we should be doing.
Congressman Glenn Ivey, a Democrat from Maryland, at Dulles International Airport today, returning from El Salvador. It's a story from Reuters. A judge in Washington on Tuesday struck down an executive order targeting law firm WilmerHale, marking the third ruling to overwhelmingly reject President Donald Trump's efforts to punish firms he perceives as enemies of his administration. U.S. District Judge Richard Leon, an appointee of Republican President George W. Bush, said Trump's order retaliated against the law firm in violation of U.S. constitutional protections for free speech and due process. WJLA-TV in Washington writes that D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser has unveiled her budget for this year to address cuts forced by Congress, but also a plan for the city's financial future. The district had to crunch a lot of numbers to balance the budget, shifting costs too. There were two things the supplemental budget needed to do. First, it had to address the cuts made by Congress, which initially were more than $1.1 billion, but then they tallied all the numbers, and because of a legal loophole, that number ended up going down to $347 million. Second, the district had to make sure it could pay its bills by the end of the year. That was from WJLA-TV. Here is Jennifer Reed, Director of Washington's Office of Budget and Performance Management, followed by Mayor Muriel Bowser on what was cut and not cut.
So in order to close the CR gap as well as address our spending pressures and year-end needs, we did about 4 different things. One, we instituted a hiring freeze, saving about $63 million in personnel costs through the remainder of the fiscal year. Importantly, we were able to maintain frontline public safety and education and summer positions so as not to interrupt programming. We made $175 million of non-personnel service reductions, contracts, grants, equipment, supplies, things like that. We shifted $202 million of expenses in 25 into 26 that we knew we could wait until October 1 to spend. This was mainly in the workforce investment account that pays for our collective bargaining agreements and the Housing Production Trust Fund. And then we converted another $160 million of local funds into special purpose revenue funds, which also came with a higher amount of appropriation authority. Lastly, we captured about $117 million of funds, excess funds through special purpose and dedicated tax revenues. And all of that let us not only solve for the CR solution, it let us address our $167 million of spending pressures and our $180 million of year-end resource needs.
So, Jenny, if I could just jump in, because you've gone through the details of how we got here and the discussions that we had at the start of this, we have been able to allay, and we will not be recommending any furloughs or rate layoffs for the CR fix. And we will not have to close any of our facilities. So, our directors really spent a lot of time, if it came to this, to do this in a way that we would not overly impact services to the community, but we won't have to do that. We fully funded our police and teachers with this budget. And we won't have any changes to our summer programming.
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat, and before that, Jennifer Reed, director of the city's Office of Budget and Performance Management, at a news conference today at the MLK Library in Washington. These cuts were made necessary because the CR, or continuing resolution, that funds the federal government through the rest of the current fiscal year, passed Congress and was signed by the president and required the district to reduce spending by $1 billion. The Senate has since passed a bill that would reverse that, and President Trump supports it, but some House Republicans do not, and it has not been brought up for a vote in the House. Also today, Mayor Bowser said that due to federal government downsizing through DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency in the Trump administration, it's expected that the loss of 40,000 federal government-related jobs will result in $1 billion in lower revenue to the district over the next 4 years. A funeral service today for the late Congressman Gerald Connelly, Democrat of Virginia, held at Heritage Fellowship Church in Reston, Virginia. Gerald Connelly was first elected in 2008 after serving as chair of the Fairfax Board of Supervisors. He died May 21st after a battle with esophageal cancer. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, gave one of the eulogies.
But you know, with Jerry, it wasn't just what he did, it was his own style in doing it. Tough. You wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of a Jerry Connelly cross-examination. But also very funny and able to laugh not only at others, but laugh at himself in a very endearing way. Jerry's laugh could fill up any room. Yet Jerry could go quiet in a microsecond to narrow his focus to one person in any room who really needed his full attention. I was on a Senate trip last week to Ottawa, Canada. It's weird that you have to do a peacekeeping mission to Canada these days. And I was with 5 bipartisan colleagues. All had interacted with Jerry either when they had served in the House before coming to the Senate or on NATO matters. And Thursday night, when the business of the day was done, we just regaled each other with all kinds of great Jerry Connelly stories. His sense of style, the stupid jokes he told at his annual St. Patrick's Day party, and the super exaggerated Irish brogue that he would affect. Or how about his love for parades and his willingness to wear the most garish and gaudy flag-covered apparel and take joy in doing it? Jerry had a style that was just, here I am, world, accept me for who I am. I'm going to just be me.
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, giving one of the eulogies at the funeral for the late Congressman Gerald Connelly, Democrat of Virginia, today at his church in Reston, Virginia. Gerald Connelly was the ranking Democrat on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And today, the Democratic caucus chair in the House, Pete Aguilar of California, sent a Dear Colleague letter to other House Democrats announcing that the secret ballot election to select a replacement will be on June 24th. It's a story from Politico. The contest to serve as the panel's ranking member and as a prominent foil to President Donald Trump's administration is shaping up to be a competitive 4-way race that could test Democrats' adherence to their seniority system for committee leadership and appetite to elevate younger members. Jasmine Crockett of Texas, Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts, Kwesi Mfume of Maryland, and Robert Garcia of California are all expected to run for the position. That was from Politico. From Associated Press, former U.S. Congressman Charles Rangel of New York, an outspoken, gravel-voiced Harlem Democrat who spent nearly 5 decades on Capitol Hill and was a founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus, died Monday at age 94. A veteran of the Korean War, he defeated legendary Harlem politician Adam Clayton Powell in 1970 to start his congressional career. During the next 40-plus years, he became a legend himself as dean of the New York congressional delegation, and in 2007, the first African-American to chair the powerful Ways and Means Committee. He stepped down from that committee amid an ethics cloud, and the House censured him in 2010, but he continued to serve in Congress until his retirement in 2017. That was a story from Associated Press. C-SPAN interviewed him in 2016 as he was retiring.
What will you miss about Congress?
What I would miss, I've already missed.
and I don't know whether it's coming back in my lifetime, the camaraderie. To be able to say that you have a job, if you want to call it that, because I never looked at it that way, where people said that in this great country we got to pick 435 people. They don't look alike. They have different backgrounds. They came to this country in different ways. And the only thing they have in common is that they love this country. And they want this country to be great. And that in a few hundred years, they allowed people who look like you to go from slavery to the highest court in the land. And you're a part of that. And what your job is to learn about what these other Americans are thinking so that we can get a fair shake in this great country. What a concept. I don't see how these guys thought it up, quite frankly. I think they screwed up on Electoral College, but other than that, to have a constitution where they weren't even thinking about people of color, weren't thinking about women, weren't thinking about poor people, but it had the elasticity to build and to grow, and even today, I don't think it's been tested the way it is in this last presidential election. I mean, somebody gets 2 million votes more than somebody else and they lose. It's got to be hard to explain that, and I put in a bill with Senator Boxer, during her bill rather, to get rid of the Electoral College, only because people should understand that things have changed since that document was written. So we ought to constantly review the parts that don't make sense and keep the parts that allowed us to have such a great nation.
Congressman Charles Rangel, Democrat from New York, in a C-SPAN interview in 2016, the year he retired from Congress after 46 years in the House. He has died at the age of 94. That was one of over 1,000 C-SPAN appearances over the years. You can find them all at the C-SPAN Video Library at cspan.org. A lot of tributes to the late congressman coming in. Andrew Cuomo, former New York governor, a Democrat, who's now running for New York City mayor, writing on X, Charlie Rangel was a mentor and a friend. He taught me that leadership is about lifting others up. And in the face of injustice, you don't flinch, you don't fold, you fight. He was a giant in every sense, and though he's gone, his spirit will echo for generations to come. And Congresswoman Gwen Moore, Democrat of Wisconsin, on X, Charles Rangel, 1930 to 2025, he was a war hero, the trailblazing first black chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, a founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus. America has lost an institution of change, and I have lost a dear friend. Rest in peace, Charlie. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, a live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy. From Washington, D.C. to across the country. Coming up Wednesday morning, Randy Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers discusses the Trump administration's proposed changes to public education. And then Robert Enlow of EdChoice on education policy changes under the Trump administration and their impact on the school choice movement. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.